the possibility of recovery exists, and the possibility of recovery exists not only for me, but for others with a progressive neurologic or autoimmune disease.
Your story with MS has a lot of ebbs and flows, and it goes all the way back to 1980. You're in med school, you start having this unusual face pain. What did you think was happening at the time?
I wasn't sure. I could tell that usual meds didn't do anything for it. Narcotics didn't do anything for it. It would last a couple days and then it would fade. Life was busy, so I just tried to ignore it as best I could.
So how long did that go on for?
That would persist and become gradually more troublesome over the next 20 years.
Okay, so where's the climax point? What happened where you realize, I need to do something and look into this further because this isn't fixing itself and this seems to be a bit more serious than initially intended?
What happened was I it became certainly steadily much more aggressive. Finally saw neurology and tried a variety of medications, which did not work. That was difficult. I just realized, okay, I'm just going to have to put up with this. And it was clear as a progressive problem. Then 20 years later, so I'm now 45, I developed weakness in my left leg, and I'm seen back in neurology, and then a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis is made. And at that time, the face pain and the multiple sclerosis, I'm told that they are separate, distinct entities. I start treatment for the MS, see the best people, take the newest drugs. Within 3 years, I'm having difficulty walking. I'm in a tilt-recline wheelchair, and it's becoming progressively more difficult to sit up. The face pains are progressively much more severe, much more difficult to turn off. And that is when I'm like, I got to be doing everything that I can to slow my decline. And that is when I go back to reading the basic science. And I develop theories that mitochondria are the driver of of the worsening disability. And so I focus on creating a supplement cocktail for my mitochondria. And that slows my decline. And I am thrilled, Jesse. I mean, I am really thrilled. But of course, I am still declining. And then I discover the Institute for Functional Medicine. They have a lovely little course on neuroprotection. I take that and have a longer list of supplements. And then I have this really interesting aha moment. What if I redesign my paleo diet that I've been on already for 5 years, and based on what I was using as supplements, and because I figure if I do that, I'm probably going to get more nutrients than what is in the supplement form. I figure out where they are in the food supply. So that takes some research, several months actually. And so instead of focusing on what to remove from my diet, I'm now focusing more on what to add. I have a much more structured paleo diet. And that's really when the magic happens.
I want to take time and get into that diet, but before we do, what's really interesting about your story is you're a conventionally trained medical doctor, so you have that way of conventional thinking based on your training, but yet you turn to an alternative, quote unquote, route when it comes to healing from this. And I know part of that, if not the majority of the catalyst for that, was your wife and your kids. So I'd love for you to talk about the impact that they played and you fighting and trying to dig deeper than your conventional training to find an alternative way to treat this.
So as I'm steadily declining, I'm having to reinvent how I think about parenting. And I know what's most important to me is that my children grow up to be successful adults emotionally and economically. and that they're going to watch the choices I'm making every day. I could give in to despair, and I assure you that I certainly had opportunities to think that way. Or I could, okay, I got to do the best that I can given my reality, because I can model that you don't give up. And so I did my little workouts every day. I got in the pool and I swam, and then I did little swimming aerobics when I could no longer was coordinated enough to swim. And so my mantra was, your kids are watching. You got to keep doing the best you can. And I also then realized, okay, am I doing all that I can? I can still read. I can go to PubMed and start searching. So at first I was looking for the latest research, conventional, newest molecule stuff. And finally it occurred to me, I should look for things that I could access. And so I started reading supplement studies for studies that had shrinking brains in progressive neurologic disability. And as I read those basic science studies, what I saw was mitochondrial dysfunction was a common pathway across multiple neurodegenerative diseases. And so I thought in 2004 that mitochondrial dysfunction was probably the driver of disability in multiple sclerosis.
Let's talk about the health scene, because this is a while back. It's hard to picture back, to that time and what things might have been like. But we're in a world now where with the internet, there's so much information with podcasts and books and doctors that are, changing career paths and talking about these quote unquote, again, alternative ways of treating and treating the body. What was the scene like back then? Like access to supplements and information. You mentioned PubMed, but were a lot of other people, could you find other people to connect with?
There were articles in the internet, and as I would look at articles, I wanted to know, were they citing scientific research that I could go read in PubMed, and if they weren't, I didn't bother reading that article because I couldn't trust the citations. And then I got to be more comfortable reading the literature. I was on the Institutional Review Board committee, so I was reviewing research as part of my job for the university, and so I was getting more comfortable with that. And it took a while to sort through what my comfort level was what was information that I had confidence in, and what was information that I was not confident that there's any scientific rationale.
Well, let's get a full picture here. We're going to progress through your story in a sec here, but talk about before you took that first round of supplements. I think you mentioned they just helped decline the rate at which things were deteriorating, but talk about signs and symptoms and what you were going through mentally at that time.
So, I have fatigue. Fortunately, I'm still mentally quite clear, but the fatigue is getting more troublesome. I'm certainly feeling quite fatigued by 10 in the morning. I am taking Provigil, which is a stimulant, and that's somewhat helpful. I can tell that if I'm not on the Provigil, I'm even more exhausted, so I'm grateful for that. I know that I need to exercise every day. I am very sensitive to how much exercise I can do. If I do too much, I'm exhausted. I have to lay flat on my back for the day, and I can't go to work. It's difficult to sit up in a regular chair as I'm here. So I have a zero gravity chair in my office and in my home, and I'm using that. I can't go out to eat or to movies because I can't sit up in those chairs anymore. It's very hard to drive 6 hours up to Wisconsin, where my wife's family is, because I can't sit up. So We have a minivan, adjust it so I am fully reclined in the minivan, so we can make those drives. And we carry a sort of a zero gravity lawn chair when we go places. So we set that up so I can recline back because sitting up in a regular chair has become not sustainable. And it's clear that what I have is progressive. That the severity of my pain is continuing to get worse. I'd say in 2007, the trajectory of my illness, Jesse, was quite clear that I was heading towards becoming bedridden. I was beginning to have some brain fog, so certainly concerned that dementia would happen. And because the trigeminal neuralgia was more frequent and more severe, and one of the things that certainly was on my mind was this going to turn permanently on? And when it was on, light, sound, speaking, swallowing triggers this intense electrical pain, starting from here at my temple, radiating down to my jaw, mostly on my right, but also sometimes on my left. Fortunately, never both sides simultaneously. Going to the pain clinic, taking a maximum dose of gabapentin, taking Cytomedrol when that would turn on. And my fear was that it would turn permanently on.
Well, let's get more into the mental aspect. You talked about brain fog and the fear, but what were you going through at the time? You're somebody that's, trained as a medical doctor. You have this education that you've worked so hard and you have a family and you're seeing things progressively deteriorate and you don't have a lot of hope. Are you feeling depressed? What do you like? What's going on inside your head at that time?
It's certainly very difficult. And certainly you're struggling to not give in to depression and despair. But I'm also very mindful that my kids are watching. And so I'm going to stay positive, tell them that yes, things will be okay. I am a physician with staff. I'm telling my staff that things will be okay. And certainly one of the things that I observe, Jesse, is the more you say things will be okay to your family and to your staff, over a time, you're like, well, things will be okay. Now, I also at the same time could see that there's a progressive trajectory that I was also facing simultaneously.
Talk more about that piece. I find that very interesting when you talk about the piece of saying things will be okay. Obviously, you're saying that aloud, you're having an impact on your conscious, your subconscious. But what do you think is happening there?
I think by continuing to have these positive affirmations, things will be okay. We will get through this. You are rewiring your brain to some extent, and that is incredibly helpful. I think these positive affirmations, these power poses that I take my tribe through now, it is actually a very vital part of healing. And my commitment to modeling that positivity to my children and to my staff was certainly key to my mental health for getting through that. Because, absolutely, there was a lot of despair and depression. And so there's no question at substantial parts of my life, I was acting. I was projecting confidence and optimism to my staff, projecting confidence and optimism to my family. And over time, that projection calmed me. And it's like, things will be okay. I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out, but things will be okay. I'm doing all that I can. And That's what I needed to know, that I was doing all that I can to have the best outcome that is possible.
Let's jump back to the part of the story where I believe you said you switched some of your supplements and then realized, there's ways to get these through food. So, first of all, I'd like to know what supplements were you taking? And then, secondarily, how did you go about figuring out what foods to introduce and what were those foods?
So at the time, we're talking vitamin D, the omega 3s, DHA, EPA, carnitine, creatine, coenzyme Q, lipoic acid, B vitamins. And I was, I've probably been doing that cocktail for about 6 months. And I thought, it's nothing happening. I'm wasting my time, I'm wasting my money. And I stopped them. And 36 hours later, I just really had a hard time getting out of bed, hard time functioning. On the third day, my spouse came in and said, honey, I think I got to try these again. So I took them. The next morning, I was like, wow, felt quite a bit better. Went to work. I thought, wow, that was really interesting. So 2 weeks later, I stopped everything again. And 36 hours later, I crashed again. I waited 3 days, resumed my supplements, felt better, and thought, well, my supplements aren't truly not curing me, but they are doing something. They're doing a lot, and maybe they're doing more than the disease-modifying drugs that I'm taking. That part wasn't quite clear, but the other thing that struck me, Jesse, was I'm figuring stuff out that my neurologist and my primary care are not talking to me about. And maybe they know the stuff, but they just aren't telling me. And so that was inspiring. It got me, faithful in my supplements, got me inspired to read more basic science and have a lot more confidence that, yes, there are things that I can be doing that will make a difference to my disease course. And that was a powerful, powerful experience to realize that, yes, my actions are going to make a huge matter here.
So, you have the realization supplements are helping. You eventually make the pivot into, transitioning to food to replace at least some of
Yeah, it
those.
takes me
Talk
several
about that
years.
transition.
Yeah. It's sort of funny. So I'm reading studies that they're interesting, adding a few additional supplements as we go along. I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine. That's great. And then I've already been doing the paleo diet. So I'm gluten-free, no legumes, no grains. And then I have this really interesting aha, like, what if I look at my list of supplements, figure out where they are in the food supply? What I'm thinking is that if I get them from the food supply, there's probably additional nutrients, biologically active compounds in those foodstuffs that are likely also beneficial. I ask my RD friends that they can't help me. I go to the library. The librarians can't really help me. So I'm back on the internet doing some searching. The Linus Pauling Institute for Micronutrients. And so I'm reading through them, looking up the various micronutrients that I'm keen on. What are the best food sources? How they align with the paleo diet. So I come back with a list of foodstuffs that I should be eating. And I start that new way of eating December 26th, 2007. And then, in January, I go to this new clinical assignment where I'm going to be seeing patients in the traumatic brain injury clinic without residents. And I had expected that I would not be able to do that. And so I was quite surprised. I started that the second week of January. I just watch my colleagues. The third week, I started seeing the patients and realized at the end of the third week, like, I can do this. Getting up out of a wheelchair, examining folks, sitting back down, making my notes, and I'm like, maybe this is going to work out. And at the end of the month, it's clear that my mental clarity is improving, my energy is improving, and by the end of the third month, I'm beginning to walk with walking sticks in the hallways. But what's so remarkable that this dramatic change in overall health and vitality when I shifted away from focused on what to not eat and had this greater focus on what to eat. And then when I went through this, and this really changed, of course, how I'm thinking about disease and health. It changes how I'm talking with patients at my primary care clinic, in the traumatic brain injury clinic. And I decide that I'm going to get them fired up about food. And Jesse, I can't just give them the list of all the foodstuffs that I'm eating. Now I realized I have to create sort of a structure and a framework so I can teach the big picture of how to do this in a 5-minute conversation with the vet. And they have a chance to remember it when they go home. And so there was some trial and error with how to get this put together. But that's how I came up with the 9 cups, 3 cups of greens, 3 cups of the cabbage, onion, mushroom family vegetables, 3 cups of deeply colored vegetables and berries. And then we have 6 to 12 ounces of protein that in forms of meat. And of course, we have some adjustments there based on gender and size and how much work you're doing.
So you're consuming the paleo diet, you're taking these supplements, it's somewhat helping, but then the big catalyst was when you ended up trying to switch your diet to fill in what you were getting for the supplements. And that's when you started to really see the changes. Talk about that early diet. You just talked about the diet where it is today, but talk about the first rendition of that diet, what it looked like.
It's a list of foodstuffs. And that's really too complicated to teach people. I had a list of various foods that I was eating. It became much easier and much more manageable when I created food categories and a guidance system.
So when you really started to see things pick up and things to actually start improving, again, being given this diagnosis before and just basically feeling like you're going to slowly degrade, maybe halted a little bit by some of the changes you're making, talk about the hope and the optimism you felt at that time when you really started to see what you were doing was working and things could actually go the other way.
What's interesting, Jesse, is when you have a progressive neurologic disorder and you see strength decline, stamina decline, eventually in that process, you get to a point where you can let go of the future and that you'll just take each day as it unfolds. And that's a very helpful adaptive strategy that lets you survive and be content with the day. So by 2007, I've had 27 years of a progressive pain disorder, the trigeminal neuralgia, and 7 years of multiple sclerosis, which clearly had progressed. So I'd had certainly a lot of history with understanding I had a progressive neurologic disorder, and I'd let go of my future. I had learned how to take each day as it unfolded. I had been experimenting on myself. I had originally done a very, very low-fat diet. Which everybody would have said is a very heart-healthy, great diet, beans and rice, lots of vegetables, but for me, did not work out well. Went on a paleo diet, continued to decline, added supplements, declined, but more slowly, very grateful. Redesigned my paleo diet, I began getting stronger. I am surprised. My mental clarity is improving. I am surprised. My pain is gone. I am very surprised. My physical therapist says you're getting stronger. He advances my exercises. I advance my exercises. I decide to mail a letter down the hall at the VA, getting out of my wheelchair using 2 walking sticks. And I mail my letter, stunning my colleagues because they see me walking for the first time in years. And I begin walking around the hospital using my walking sticks. But I'm still taking each day as it unfolds. I don't really know what any of this stuff means. I let go of my future. We're into April. I'm walking around the block. And by now in April, I'm graduating. I'm not using my walking sticks anymore. I mentioned to Jackie, because we used to bike a lot. It was a big family activity back when Jackie and I had biked a whole lot together, and then with our kids. And I remember asking Jack, do you think maybe I could try biking again? I said, well, if things keep going well, maybe in the fall. It was a couple weeks later. It was Mother's Day. And I wanted to try biking. We had to have an emergency family meeting. And my kids did not want me to bike because they didn't want me to fall and risk getting hurt because I'd made so much progress. But Jack decided that I could try. So we got in position, and we pushed off, and bike wobbles a little bit. I catch my balance, and I bike around the block. My son is crying, my daughter's crying, Jackie's crying, and I'm crying. And you see, it was at that moment that I understood the current understanding of secondary progressive multiple sclerosis was incomplete. In that who knew how much recovery might be possible. And that's when I moved past the taking each day as it unfolded. That I now expected that how much recovery might be possible. And this might be real in that who knew how close to normal function I might be able to get. So that's Mother's Day. In October, so a few months later, we've signed me up for a courage ride, which is 18.5 miles. We have no idea if I can ride 18.5 miles. The furthest I'd ridden at that point was 8 miles. But we do. And I have to stop several times. But I ride 18.5 miles. And once again, we're all crying. My kids are crying, my wife's crying, I'm crying. And, we have, I don't know what the future is, but now I understand it's going to be better. I can get stronger. That the possibility of recovery exists, and the possibility of recovery exists not only for me, but for others with a progressive neurologic or autoimmune disease. And that radically changes my focus, what I'm doing, and where I'm going in life.
Those are incredible stories. And I think a big part of why they're so important to share is giving other people that hope. You talked about the hope piece there, and just allowing others who are going through something similar to understand that they shouldn't give up hope. There is a path to, at least, we can't say completely recover, but there is a path out of this. What I'm curious about is, did you have anybody like that you could look up to who had MS or anything similar that
Oh
could give
goodness,
you a
no,
little bit of fight, like either through
no,
your
no.
internet searches or anything like that?
The message I received from all of my physicians were once you go to secondary progressive MS, functions once lost are gone. And when the brain shrinks, it's gone. So that's why I treated my disease very aggressively. And why, you know, I had gotten to the point where I'd let go of the future. It's like, okay, I'll just take each day as it unfolds. And, it's really quite remarkable how remarkably improved I was. But it wasn't until I got on that bike and rode around the block, that I was like, okay, I wonder how far can I come back?
And this is a really interesting time because, when this all happened, the internet was really picking up steam, and you've been able to share that hope and share that inspiration in your message far and wide. You've written a book and you've done a TED Talk. You've done so many different things to spread this message. I'm curious, how far along the journey was it that you decided to go public with this and share your story?
Well, let's see. So 2008, I'm walking around. I think it was probably 2009. I called our local organic grocer and said, I pitched the idea of giving a local talk. And they said, well, I'd like to talk about how changing my diet had a big impact on my MS. And they said, we do little cooking classes, cooking demonstrations, but I don't know, maybe this would be interesting. So they did schedule it, and they had to move the location of the talk several times because there was so much demand. And so then I started giving talks for the organic grocer, some local churches, synagogues, temples, community college, schools, regional meetings. Interesting enough, the local MS Society wanted me to give a talk. I got interviewed by the Clinical Advisory Committee, who thought my message was incredibly dangerous, and they banned me as a speaker. So I shrugged that off and continued giving my talks. I submitted a proposal to give a talk at Iowa City TEDx, which went viral and did very well, which then led to the book deal, which was a bestseller, which led the MS Society, which monitors social media to get a sense of what their constituents want to talk about and are interested in. So they had a wellness conference ahead of their annual conference, got me there. And I said, I've been banned, so you have to get me unbanned. I'm a plenary speaker at another conference, so I have to talk with them, see if I can adjust what day I'm speaking. So we did get that worked out. They got me unbanned. I got to the conference, they had 45 scientists, 45 people with MS. And when I arrived, the public folks all had copies of my book, so I'm signing their books, getting photos with them, and I'm thinking, dear God, I'm probably really annoying the scientists. That was a lively conference because the scientists were saying there's no evidence, and I would come back and say, well, But we have great evidence that sugar and processed food increase the comorbid problems and that vegetables are good. So we can at least agree with that basic message. And there are others more nuances that do need more scientific study. But the basic message of sugar is a problem and vegetables are good is not controversial. But at that time, it was. But I hung in there with the MS Society, helping them move their messaging along. And I'm pleased to say that they have, in fact, since their conference in 2015, have embraced messages that sugar and processed food is a problem. Vegetables are good. If you eat grain, make it be whole grain, have more protein, and less processed food. And that more, and then they have a great review on the various research studies that have been done. So a lot of really wonderful progress has been made.
So coming back to the bike rides, and you start to really realize, this is working. You're building momentum with your hope. But at that time, you're just an N of one, and this is working for you. You must be curious in the early days before you start to share, is this going to work with other people? So how long before you start to share that message and then see from others who are experiencing MS or other similar chronic conditions, and they start reporting back to you that this is working for them?
Well, the early days, I was very careful to say, this is my experience. This is the scientific rationale for what I'm doing and why. And talk to your primary care doc about how to add more vegetables, improve your diet, add exercise, etc. So I was very careful to have those caveats. I would also say my chief of medicine at the university said, what you've done is so remarkable. I want you to do a small safety and feasibility study to see if others can do this. So we had that going. So very early on, we saw that others could implement it, and that we saw in others with progressive MS remarkable improvements in energy, quality of life, and that half of those folks had remarkable improvements in motor function. Now, in my clinics at the VA, in the primary care clinic, I'm fired up, and I actually have discovered that I'm much more effective than anticipated getting vets to change their diet, improve their diet, add exercise. And we saw that people were losing weight without being hungry, diabetes was being reversed, rheumatoid arthritis pain was being greatly diminished, mood is being improved. In the traumatic brain injury clinic, we saw that people had less pain, more energy, more mental clarity, better relations with their family. And we saw that, actually, this is pretty interesting. The chief of medicine at the VA came to me and said, we'd like to take you out of primary care and have you establish your own clinic where you could use these concepts for your patients.
That's so interesting. And it must have been, you talked about the feelings you had, and we got to see the feelings you're still experiencing when you talk about that first bike ride, and then when you did the other longer bike ride. It must have been in a different way, but it must have been just as exciting when you saw that this could help other people as well.
The first two clinics that I did this in were the traumatic brain injury clinic. In the traumatic brain injury clinic, the standard way of interacting with those veterans were that you've had your blast injury. There's nothing we can do, and you'll recover at the level that you're going to recover, and maybe we can give you some aids such as a smartphone or a tablet to help you. I come in and say, oh my goodness, there's so much we can do to help to make it easy for you to get as much recovery as possible. And I start talking about diet, exercise, meditation. And at first, it really pisses off my colleagues who are very insistent that there's nothing we can do. And so I have to work through that. In the year, because we'd see people every 6 months, my colleagues in the traumatic brain injury clinic saw that, in fact, they could tell who I had seen because the people I had seen were remarkably better. They were remarkably more likely to still have their job, their family, to have less pain, and be back at work. And the folks who had not had the opportunity to see me were more likely to have lost employment, lost their family, and to be on permanent disability. So my traumatic brain injury partners got on board. My primary care clinics where I was staffing residents, the residents began to get on board with, because I'm teaching the residents these concepts. At first, we're talking biochemistry. They think maybe I'm teaching them about the latest, newest drug, but I'm talking about broccoli and turmeric and ginger and exercise and meditation. And then they are surprised at how easily I can get their veteran patients interested and excited about diet and self-care in these short 5-minute conversations. And so the primary care residents are beginning to see just how powerful diet and lifestyle can be in their clinical practice. These comments from patients who are having remarkable success are coming back into the patient's comment section, which gets back to how the chief of medicine says, you know what, Terry, I think you're onto something, and we would like to create a clinic around what you are doing. Now, it takes a while to get the approvals in place, because when this comes up, I say, we have to be sure that the chief of staff and the chief of nursing and the hospital director are on board with this before we go down that path.
And you're sharing, again, diet, lifestyle, different strategies for people to implement, but you're also giving them hope, I assume, sharing your story.
Well, giving them hope.
Which the piece I'm really curious about, obviously the lifestyle and the diet is important, but how important is that hope piece? People being able to hear your story when you're chatting with them and giving them a brighter future, a sign that they can heal and improve.
You need to know it's possible. You need to understand at a high level the mechanisms of how it might work, so you can understand it. So you have to have inspired possibility in cases of recovery, a metaphor that explains the mechanism of why it matters. So I had farm metaphors, mechanic metaphors, teaching metaphors, soil metaphors, animal husbandry metaphors to help people get why diet and lifestyle matters. A simple message of what their next steps could be, and an invitation that they could decide which steps they want to take and in what order. And I'd write this out by hand and give it to them. And I'd say about half of my veterans were like, okay, I'll give this a try. And about half were like, oh, that's too much work. Okay, there wasn't much I could do for them. But the folks who were willing to give it a try, when they came back in 6 months, they were seeing progress. And we would invite them to take the next step. They'd see more and more progress. And so they're coming back to the hospital administration, so like, oh my God, Dr. Wahls has just made such a huge difference. So you have to inspire hope. You have to understand at a basic level the mechanisms of why the intervention might work, so you can feel like I'm willing to do this work. And then a small, achievable next step.
Earlier, you talked about a number of chronic conditions that have been helped by using the Wahls Protocol. So basically, just to clarify, this is a diet and lifestyle that could benefit everybody.
Well, it depends what your goals are. So if you have autoimmune issues, if you have mental health issues, if you have metabolic problems, diabetes, prediabetes, insulin resistance, that would be helpful. If you want to have healthy aging, so you want your brain to be working well for the next 4, 5, 6 decades. So you're going to have a great brain, strong body, be fully functional in your 60s, 90s, 100, and beyond. This diet and self-care program is a great strategy for that.
Well, I think we've done a great job of convincing people this does work and giving a general overview, including the diet. You talked about the 9 cups of vegetables. But what I'd like to do now is dig into some of the nuances of this diet and lifestyle, starting with the diet piece. So, again, we got into the 9 cups of veggies, but let's get a little bit deeper into what that looks like.
Well, one of the first things we have to ask people, are you a meat eater? Are you a vegetarian or a vegan? If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, is this because you are, that's your spiritual belief, and that's important to you? Or had you made that choice on the basis of a health recommendation? So if the person's committed to being a vegan or vegetarian, we'll have different protein recommendations for them in terms of rice and legumes. So they have a complete protein. If they're open to having fish, then we'll talk to them about the benefits of having fish in their diet. If they are a meat eater, then we'll talk about having meat as part of their protein source. And I'll talk about the benefits of including organ meat, including liver, heart, tongue, bone broth, that these are very helpful protein sources and very helpful to have a more comprehensive organ meat profile. Our ancestors would have had eaten what's called nose to tail, would have consumed the whole organism, and by eliminating our meat to only muscle sources, that shifts the amino acid profile. Would be better served if we also included more bone broths, stews, so we have a more complete amino acid profile.
You talked about the vegetarian piece there, and you come at that from a really unique angle, being an ex-vegetarian. Why do you think there are so many people in the health and wellness space that there's such a big piece of the pie that embraces that diet? And I think a lot of it is beyond religion or ethics. They feel like that is a diet that's going to heal them. In your studies and research, is there cases where that diet is good for healing, or is it just misinformation?
You can be a vegetarian or vegan. If you are a vegetarian or vegan, well, I'll put it this way: if you're a vegetarian, you make it much more difficult to have an adequate supply of B12, which is a very important vitamin for making brain tissue, making blood cells. If you're a vegan, then it's even harder still to have a sufficient supply of B12. You also will make it harder to have a sufficient supply of the omega-3 essential fatty acids that are very important for cell membranes and for making myelin, the insulation on the wiring in the brain. When people first embrace a vegetarian diet, they may have remarkably improved their vegetable intake, their fiber intake. They may have had some detox and may have experienced significant improvement in their health. Over time, if they're becoming deficient in B12, then they'll begin to have neurologic symptoms, mental health symptoms. They may have anemia, and their health slowly declines. But it's very hard to recognize that that is part of the vegetarian diet. One can compensate these potential nutrient lacks with supplements, with B vitamin supplements, with B12 supplements, with measuring your homocysteine, your folate, B12 levels, and correcting those deficiencies. You can measure the omega-3 levels in the blood, and you can correct the omega-3, omega-6 fat ratios with supplements. So, one can carefully be sure that you have sufficient protein. Depending on the individual, this may be a higher in carbs. They may still have food sensitivities, and so that there may be problems. But for some individuals, it's certainly possible to thrive and do very well as a vegetarian, particularly if you're paying attention to your folate, B12 levels. So yes, this can work. And I'm absolutely very mindful that if people are vegetarian or vegan for their spiritual beliefs, we have to honor that. We want to work with them on that. And I certainly recognize that vegetarian sources of protein may be economically more sustainable for many families. And in my clinics at the VA, we certainly saw people who were living on food stamps with very simple means. And we would teach them how to have some vegetarian meals or how to do this as a vegetarian with appropriate supplementation. So it can be done. Jesse, I want people to know that as I interview people and understand, are you a meat eater, not a meat eater? What are your medical issues? What are the symptoms we're trying to address? We mutually identify what is the diet they're going to start with that they and their family can be successful with. What are the dietary changes that they and their family can embrace? I like to have people start with what are the things to add before we begin to address what are the things to remove.
Earlier, you talked about the 9 cups of veggies that's recommended on the Wahls Protocol, the general Wahls Protocol, because there is 4 different levels to it now in the latest book. So when it comes to the 9 cups of veggies, a third of that is sulfur-containing veggies. So I'd love to get into the nuances of why those have such a big piece of the pie and why they're so important.
So if we look at the last 100 years, certainly the last 300 years, we have been systematically making more chemicals to use in industrial processes, manufacturing processes, and growing our food. So every year we add millions of tons of these chemicals into our living, working, our food and water. These chemicals are in our body. We have to process and eliminate them. The sulfur-containing vegetables are really helpful support for the kidneys, the sweat glands, and the liver in the process and elimination of these synthetic compounds. In addition, the sulfur-containing vegetables are really great support for the intracellular antioxidant producing enzymes in the many of the neurotransmitters in the brain. I would also add that we have a growing body of research that more mushrooms, they have, of course, culinary mushrooms, because there are poisonous mushrooms that will do us in. But these culinary mushrooms, the more mushrooms that you have, the lower the risk of cognitive decline, depression, anxiety. And so we certainly encourage people to have mushrooms as a regular part of their diet as well.
And as part of that baseline plan, we talked about the 9 cups of veggies. Can you talk about the details of the other 2/3?
Well, we're talking about cabbage family and onion family vegetables, and there's a large number of different plants within the cabbage family in the onion family, so garlic, chives, shallots, onions, and then in the cabbage family, many different types of cabbages, turnips, radishes, rutabagas, collard. I put the collards and kale in the green leafy category, even though it's part of the cabbage family. I classify things with green leaves in the green leafy category.
Right. So the other two categories, green leafy, we want 3 cups of that a day. And then the other one is colorful vegetables. And the
So you
differentiator
think
there,
of beets, yeah, beets, carrots, peppers, berries, things that are pigmented all the way through.
that's what I was getting into. The differentiation is the all the way through color. Things like apples, pears, they have the colorful peel, but then inside is often like a whitish color.
White, yeah, correct. So, and they've been bred to be very high in starch. So, potatoes, tubers, they're high in starch. Pears, apples, they're high in starch. And again, it sort of depends. If you have someone who's very skinny, underweight, then more fruit, more starchy vegetables are fine. If I have someone who has insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, then we're talking more of a low carbohydrate, low glycemic index kind of diet.
So, in a general sense, here, just to summarize what we've been digging into, 9 cups of veggies. We can include quality meats if that's something people are up for. If not, there's modifications people can make with the vegetarian diet. It's dairy free, gluten free, and egg free. Do I have that right?
And, I certainly agree that eggs can be a superfood if you tolerate them. But unless you remove them from your diet, preferably for 3 months, but at least a month, and then reintroduce them, you won't know if eggs are a potential problem for you.
So, if somebody is on this basic plan, what we just highlighted. Are there any additional supplements? I know a lot of the food that's in the plan is to make up for supplements. Again, going back to your story, but are there additional supplements that we just can't get from foods?
Well, we'll start with vitamin D. Our ancestors were outside 24/7, 365, and our ancestors were in equatorial Africa. We migrate slowly north. As we get further from the equator, we get more pale, so we can make more vitamin D. Uh, and in the last 300 years, we have come inside. We work inside, do our recreation inside. We put on sunscreen, we go outside. So there's often an epidemic of severe vitamin D deficiency, unless you're taking a vitamin D supplement, or you have decided that you will be outside enough to get a deep, dark tan. Therefore, my advice to people is you either go out and get enough sunlight to get a tan, because that lets you know that you're making vitamin D, or you take a vitamin D supplement and then you have to monitor your vitamin D levels so you know how much supplement you need.
And beyond vitamin D, any others that are general recommendations?
So I would also encourage getting a homocysteine level, and that is a basic way to understand your level of B vitamin metabolism. And that can guide, do you need some additional B vitamins? If you would also check into your omega-3, omega-6 fat levels in your bloodstream, you could target your level of fish oil supplementation more precisely. Ideally, I think everyone would probably benefit from a gram or two of fish oil, potentially more, depending on what your blood testing might show. And then, depending on your clinical circumstances, I have a more nuanced description of what supplements to consider. But yeah, at a really basic level, B vitamins, fish oil, vitamin D are a triad that many people will benefit from.
And Dr. Wahls, now that you've been on this diet for quite a long time, do you find you ever get tired of it, or are you still enjoying it like the early days?
The food we have is wonderful. And if anybody wants to know what I'm eating, I'll put out a pitch. Follow me on my Instagram because you'll get to see many of my meals. Uh, so I love our food. It's delicious. It's wonderful. Right now, our garden's coming in season, so we have lots of variety of greens. We have a lot of garden herbs that I make into pestos. I might make oregano pesto, basil pesto, parsley and cilantro pesto. Uh, it's marvelous. It is very, very yummy.
And one of the unique things about the way you eat is you like to have a different, I should say, extensive variety of different veggies. You're not eating the same things over and over again. And you actually set that out as a challenge for yourself and for other people to try and expand the horizon and not just consume the same 20 veggies throughout the whole year.
The goal is at least 200 different plant species in a year. And this is really a wonderful thing to do as a family. If you have children, get them on board at keeping track of how many different vegetables that you have, how many different plant species you've had in the year, in the week. It will get kids more interested in trying different teas, different spices. When they go shopping with you, they can get excited that there's a new vegetable that they've not seen before, and so they'll be more excited to try that. And then if you get them with you growing vegetables with you, it will get them more excited to try new and different vegetables.
You mentioned the meditation piece being part of this healing lifestyle that you use yourself and advocate for. Where along the journey did meditation come in for you, and what does that look like?
I learned how to do transcendental meditation in college. Did it through college. Somehow during medical school, I dropped it out. And then I'm diagnosed with MS. It's clear stress accelerates that. Why it took me so long to realize I should go back to taking time to meditate, I don't know. At least the one thing I did really correctly when I was diagnosed with MS was I was absolutely committed to exercising every day. So and I'll tell you, Jesse, I probably fluctuate with, having an hour to 2.5 hours of self-care that I will do in a day that will migrate between a heavy emphasis on workout to a heavier emphasis on meditation. More recently, I've been spending more time on a meditative practice, and I have a variety of practices. I might do heart math with some biosensor feedback. I might have guided meditations, the transcendental meditation. I may do ice baths, saunas, gratitude meditations, or just walking in the grass in my backyard, doing some grounding.
Let's get more into the exercise piece because there is such a continuum. We have flexibility exercises, strength training, aerobic, and there's such a continuum of how hard you can push it as well. There's, running around the block versus running, training for a marathon and running a marathon. So for somebody that wants to use exercise in a therapeutic way, let's talk about what you do and what other options could look like. I know swimming is a big piece for you.
Yes, I have an endless pool in my house. I really enjoy getting in the pool, swimming, doing some water aerobics. I also have a vibration plate, and I do body weight strength training on that. I have a electrical stimulation device, and I'll do strength training with that. I'll walk around the block, jog around the block. I will do long bike rides on the weekend. I have balance training exercises that I do, and then stretching and flexibility that I do. I rotate through things, and it sort of depends on how much time I have on any given day that I have. Now, and the question is, how do we design an exercise program that is specific for that person? And I'd like to advocate for anyone who has a complex chronic disease state that what they need or would greatly benefit from is an evaluation by a physical therapist or occupational therapist who can assess their strength, their balance, their endurance, their coordination, fine motor skills. Talk with them about their available equipment, their activities that they enjoy, and help them design a lifestyle physical activity program that can improve their physical fitness in all of those domains. In that, seeing a physical therapist or occupational therapist a couple times a year would be very, very beneficial. You can also supplement that with a personal trainer or exercise classes that are adapted to people who have health challenges. You can do your own home exercise program, with the goal being that for the areas that you have a challenge, that you'll want to do a little workout that's a little bit challenging. So that's a little stressful. So it's a little hard, but not too hard that it exhausts you. It could be a little bit hard. And you should be able to fully recover from that workout within a couple hours and get back to your usual level of function. And then do you need a rest day, or do you, for example, work on balance today, strength tomorrow, endurance the next day? And so you can, or do you have a workout day, rest day, workout day, rest day? It depends on the level of disability. Because in my tribe, I have people who are wheelchair dependent that we have exercising. We have people who are using a cane and exercising. And we have people who are still fully mobile without any mobility disability and are jogging still. So the particular exercises and the intensity of exercise really should be tailored to the individual needs.
I think that's important we went into the details there because it is so nuanced when we talk about exercise when it is somebody who is dealing with a chronic condition at the same time.
Yes, absolutely.
And Dr. Wahls, luckily these days, it's not the same world that you came up through when you were healing with the, development of the internet and communities forming online. I'm assuming, and I'm sure partially because of you sharing your story and forming community in the online world. Talk about what you've seen as things have progressed with community online and how important of a piece that can be for somebody who is suffering, not to just go through this alone or with their immediate family, but to connect with other people who are going through the same type of challenges and to share their story.
Certainly we have found it to be very helpful when we've run events and challenges to bring people together to talk about goals and aspirations where we, in fact, can have a community where people support one another. Behavior change, if we think about a really old organization, the Alcoholics Anonymous, they have as some of their principles a belief in a higher power, a belief in peer support, and having a mentor or a guide to help you through your hard times. And that concept is very helpful for any behavior change program. How do we do that in a behavior change process? That's having a peer interaction, sort of rah-rah, help hold you accountable, and a mentor who can guide you. Very, very helpful.
And I want to talk about your story in a very general sense. Zooming out, we talked about the early days as things were progressively getting worse, and then you were able to slow that down with supplements. And then we got to the part where you started incorporating these foods that were acting like supplements and providing you with all these nutrients, and you started to feel better. The bike riding. Since then, how has the progression been? Did it take a number of years to continue progressively getting better and better? Then did it kind of plateau? And then where are you at today?
Well, certainly I've continued. Well, a couple things happened. One is I'm aging. I'm now 66. So that is the reality for all of us. We will continue to age. And over the age of 65, in theory, the previous expectation was that frailty will increase, particularly in the MS world. You're going to be at much greater risk for falls and worsening disability, worsening cognitive decline. I am pleased to tell you that when I complete the biological age testing, if we look at things like telomeres, which is a test you can take that gives you some clue as your biological age younger or older than your chronologic age. And my telomeres came out 12 years younger than my chronologic age. And I think that's a reflection of the great job that I've done on self-care. And it's also, I should tell you that when I sent that test off, I was giving myself a big pep talk like, okay, you have a progressive neurologic disorder. Be prepared that your telomeres are going to be quite a bit older than your chronologic age. So it was quite a treat to see that I was so much younger than my chronologic age. And I can go out, I can bike for hours. I hike. I'm still writing grants, writing research, so I'm not having cognitive impairment. My energy is good. I had hoped I would someday be able to get back into running a couple miles. I haven't quite gotten that far yet, but I am jogging slowly again, so we will see. I am very pleased with my progress. And I've been very upfront that my goal is to live and thrive to 120, and I think that's certainly quite possible.
And have there been ebbs and flows over the journey where, say, you start taking things for granted because you're feeling a lot better and you get busy with work or different things and you start to maybe ease up in some of the diet or lifestyle modifications you've made and
Well,
things start to slip? Has that been part of the journey?
So part of the journey before the pandemic, I'm traveling the world, giving lectures, traveling a lot. And part of what I discovered is if I did too much traveling, my face pain would be more likely to trigger. If I agree to schedule too many morning meetings, so I'm not getting my hour to 2.5 hours of self-care, I'm more likely to have my face pain. If I eat out at a restaurant, the problem is about 20% of the restaurant foods that are labeled gluten-free actually have gluten in them. So eating at a restaurant, I've learned to be very, very careful about what I'm ordering so I do not accidentally get gluten. The biggest issue, whenever my face pain turns on, I have a conversation, my wife and I, We think about, okay, what might the trigger have been that contributed to why my face pain uh, turned on.
There's going to be a lot of people tuning into this who are dealing with a chronic health issue, whether it be MS or a different autoimmune condition or one of the many out there. And you've done a great job sharing your story and providing hope for people that, there is another path. And maybe this is all new to you and it's not something you've heard from your conventional doctor or from other sources. But before we part ways here, as somebody that's been through this journey and seen so many people turn things around, what would you say to that person who's tuning in right now? And maybe they're on the fence and they need that little bit of a nudge that they can get better, they can heal, and they need to start the journey.
If I can come back from profound fatigue, worsening brain fog, unable to sit up, to a rich and full life where I can bike for hours, hike, jog around the block, conduct groundbreaking research. There's hope for them because at 2007 I was on the brink of bedridden, demented, intractable pain. We've seen others have remarkable success with severe pain, with severe fatigue, with rheumatoid arthritis, with lupus, with multiple sclerosis. I invite you to visit our website, pick up my books, and begin the journey one step at a time. If you feel like you want more help and more support, we have programs for you. We have some people who have remarkable success just reading my book in terms of diving in transforming their lives for themselves and their family. But it's up to you when you want to begin and how rapidly you want to make these changes.
When it comes to the Wahls Protocol, have there been specific chronic health issues that have responded particularly well versus others that are far more challenging?
So the earlier you are in your disease process, the easier it is. So people have fatigue, pain, without a diagnosis. Doctors can't figure it out yet. So you're early enough. We don't know what it is. That's a great place to start. People who are early in their disease, newly diagnosed, also a great place to start. People who are more advanced, who have more severe fatigue, mood issues, pain, that will respond well. People who have more motor deficits, so you're wheelchair dependent, you're unable to sit up, that is a more complex problem. We have been able to help those folks, but that is a more comprehensive rehabilitation problem. That is a much, much bigger job because there's a lot more work in your body that needs to happen. Pain, fatigue, energy, those are biologically easier problems to address.
For somebody who is suffering right now and say they're feeling fatigue in a heavy way and physical pain and maybe a mental health challenge, what we've talked about today might seem overwhelming to them. And if they get your book, there's a lot in there as well. I think when the time is right, they need to look at and understand these concepts we've talked about and the things you're talking about in your book. But just to send people off for somebody who doesn't have a lot of inertia right now, what is the biggest lever you'd recommend for them to get the ball rolling right after they're done listening to this?
Well, go pick up my book. Go to terrywahls.com/diet. Grab our one-page diet cheat sheet. That will give you a nice place to start. And start there. If you can, follow me on Instagram. You'll see a lot of fun meals posted there as well.
But just to look at all the different pieces we've discussed today, would you say diet is the first place people should look to if they only have the energy to really dive in on one pillar?
If you want to start with diet, that is the most impactful.
All right, Dr. Wahls, really appreciate you sharing your story You're giving so much inspiration, hope to so many. We're going to link up your social media, the website, the book, everything in the show notes. And I want to thank you for coming back on the show.
You're very welcome.
After watching my conversation with Dr. Wahls, be sure and stick around and check out my chat with Dr. William Lee. We cover the foods you need to eat to beat disease.
Foods as medicine is really a metaphor that, unlike medicines that we only give to people when they're sick, foods are a kind of medicine that we